The gunshot that killed Amelia Morgan's husband didn't even have the decency to wake her, and by the time she found him crumpled in the dust outside their wagon at dawn, the outlaws had already taken everything except the dress on her back and the wagon itself, stripped of horses and supplies. She had screamed then, a sound that tore through the empty Texas prairie like wind through canyon walls, but no one came because there was no one for miles in any direction. They had been 3 days out from Madisonville traveling to meet his brother who owned land near the Brazos River, and now Thomas lay dead with a bullet through his chest, and she was alone in a way that made her bones feel hollow. The year was 1876, and women did not survive alone on the frontier. She knew this the way she knew the sun would rise, the way she knew she should lie down beside her husband's body and wait for death or worse to find her. But Amelia had never been the kind of woman who waited. She buried Thomas with her bare hands, digging until her fingers bled and the Texas sun burned her neck raw. She said words over him that she hoped meant something, though her voice shook so badly she could barely hear herself. Then she did the only thing that made sense, which was to start walking. The wagon was useless without horses, and staying beside it would only make her an easy target for anyone passing through. Madisonville was behind her, but the Brazos River settlement was ahead, maybe 2 days on foot if she could find water. The first day passed in a haze of heat and grief. She walked through grassland that stretched endlessly in every direction, following the ruts of the trail they had taken, praying she would not lose her way. Her boots, which had been fine for riding in a wagon, raised blisters that burst and bled. She had no food, no water, and by the time the sun began to set, she was stumbling more than walking. She found the creek by accident, nearly falling into it as darkness gathered. The water was shallow and murky, but it was water, and she dropped to her knees and drank until her stomach cramped. Then she sat back on the muddy bank and looked at herself for the first time since morning. Her dress, a simple cotton thing in faded blue, was filthy with dirt and her husband's blood. Her hands were caked with mud from the grave she had dug. She looked like something that had crawled out of the earth, and the sight made something in her chest crack open. She waded into the creek fully clothed, letting the water soak through the fabric, and began to scrub at the bloodstains. The water was cold despite the day's heat, and it made her gasp, but she kept scrubbing, desperate to get the evidence of death off her body. When the stains would not come out, she began to cry, great hitching sobs that shook her whole frame. She cried for Thomas, who had been a good man even if she had not loved him the way poets wrote about love. She cried for herself, for the life she had imagined that was now impossible. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she stood in the creek, shivering, and began to wring out her dress. It was the only clothing she had. Everything else had been in the wagon, in the trunk the outlaws had taken. She could not build a fire while wearing a wet dress, but she could not take it off with nothing else to wear, so she stood there in the fading light, twisting the fabric to squeeze out as much water as possible, trying to decide what to do next. That was when she heard the horse. Her head snapped up, and she saw him at the top of the creek bank, silhouetted against the darkening sky. A man on horseback, his hat pulled low, his shoulders broad. For a moment she was certain he was one of the outlaws come back, and her heart stopped beating entirely. Then he turned his head away deliberately and said in a voice rough as gravel, "Madam, you ought to get warm. I will build a fire and keep my back turned while you do what you need to do." She was so surprised she could not speak. The man dismounted without looking at her, leading his horse away from the creek and back toward a stand of scrubby trees. She watched him go, her hands still clutching her wet dress, her mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. He was a cowboy. That much was clear from his worn leather chaps and the way he moved, easy and confident in the wilderness. He was tall, with dark hair that curled at his collar, and even in the brief glimpse she had gotten of his face, she could see he was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years. But more than any of that, he had looked away. Amelia did not know what to make of a man who would look away. She heard him moving around in the trees, heard the sound of him gathering wood, and slowly she waded out of the creek. Her dress was still damp, clinging to her skin, but it was better than it had been. She wrung out her hair as best she could and tried to stop shivering. The temperature was dropping fast now that the sun was down, and she knew she needed warmth. "Fire started, madam," the cowboy called out, his voice carefully neutral. "I have got my back to you, and I will keep it that way until you say otherwise. There's a blanket laid out near the fire if you want to wrap yourself in it." She walked toward the fire on unsteady legs, her feet aching with every step. The flames were already crackling cheerfully, and beside them was indeed a thick wool blanket, spread out and waiting. The cowboy was sitting on the far side of the fire, his back to her, staring out into the darkness. His horse was tethered nearby, calmly cropping grass. Amelia stood there for a moment, unsure what to say or do. Finally she managed, "Thank you." "No need for thanks," he said without turning around. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, then reconsidered. "I mean, my feet are blistered, but nothing serious." "You should sit down and get close to the fire. That dress will dry faster with heat." She did as he suggested, sinking down onto the blanket with a sigh of relief. The fire's warmth was immediate and wonderful, and she held out her hands to it, feeling slowly returning to her numb fingers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She studied his back, the way his shoulders were set, tense and careful. He was giving her space, she realized, giving her the choice of whether to trust him or not. "My name is Amelia Morgan," she said finally. "My husband was killed yesterday morning. Outlaws took everything but the wagon and this dress." His shoulders tightened, but he did not turn. "I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Morgan. My name is Hayes Jackson. I am a cattleman, heading back to my ranch outside Madisonville." "Madisonville?" Her voice rose with sudden hope. "That is where we came from. We were heading to the Brazos River settlement." "You are a fair ways off course, then," he said quietly. "You have been walking the wrong direction." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had been going the wrong way. All that walking, all that pain, and she had been moving away from safety instead of toward it. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, half hysterical. "Of course I was. Of course." "Mrs. Morgan, it is all right. You could not have known. These trails all look the same if you are not familiar with them." His voice was kind, and that kindness threatened to undo her entirely. "I can take you back to Madisonville. It is about a day's ride from here." "I cannot pay you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nothing." "I do not want payment." Now he did turn his head slightly, though not enough to see her, just enough that she could see his profile against the firelight. He had a strong jaw, a straight nose, and even in shadow she could see the set of his mouth was gentle. "No one should be alone out here. You do not need to pay me for basic human decency." She felt tears prick her eyes again, but she blinked them back. "You are a good man, Mr. Jackson." "I am just a man," he said, and turned back to face the darkness. "Why don't you rest, Mrs. Morgan? I will keep watch tonight. You are safe here." She wanted to argue, wanted to say she could not possibly sleep, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a current. She lay down on the blanket, curling onto her side facing the fire, and closed her eyes. The last thing she remembered was the sound of Hayes Jackson's breathing, steady and calm, and the feeling that for the first time in 2 days she might actually survive this. She woke to the smell of coffee and salt pork frying in a pan. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Hayes Jackson was crouched by the fire cooking breakfast with his back still to where she had slept. Her dress had dried during the night, stiff and uncomfortable against her skin, but at least it was dry. "Good morning," she said, sitting up slowly. Everything hurt, her feet, her legs, her back, her hands. She felt like she had been trampled by a herd of cattle. "Morning," he replied, still not looking at her. "I made coffee if you want some. Food will be ready in a minute." She accepted the tin cup he held out behind his back, careful not to touch his hand, and sipped the strong, bitter brew. It was the best thing she had tasted in days. "You can turn around, Mr. Jackson. I am decent." He did, finally meeting her eyes, and she saw that he was younger than she had thought, probably no more than 25. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held a wariness that she recognized. He had seen hard things too. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Thank you for keeping watch, and for the blanket." "It is no trouble." He dished salt pork onto 2 tin plates and handed one to her along with a piece of hardtack. "We should eat quick and get moving. The sooner we get you to Madisonville, the better." They ate in silence, and Amelia found herself stealing glances at him. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years spent on the trail, every gesture purposeful and efficient. His clothes were worn but well cared for, and his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, looked healthy and content. This was a man who knew how to survive out here, who understood the land and respected it. When they finished eating, Hayes packed up his camp with practiced ease while Amelia tried to help, though she felt mostly useless. Her feet screamed with every step, and she could not quite hide her wince. "Let me see your feet," Hayes said, noticing. When she hesitated, he added, "I promise to be quick about it. But if those blisters get infected, you could lose a foot. Out here, that is a death sentence." She sat down and reluctantly pulled off her boots and stockings. Her feet were a mess of burst blisters and raw, bleeding skin. Hayes looked at them for a moment, his jaw tight, then went to his saddlebags and pulled out a small tin. "This is salve made from yarrow and beeswax," he said, kneeling in front of her but keeping his eyes on her feet. "It will help with infection and speed healing. May I?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. His hands, when they touched her feet, were gentle, his touch impersonal and quick as he spread the salve over her wounds and then wrapped them in clean strips of cloth from his pack. The relief was immediate, the salve cooling and soothing. "You should ride in front of me on the horse," he said when he finished. "I know it is not proper, but walking is out of the question for you, and the horse can carry us both easily enough." "I do not want to be a burden," she started, but he cut her off. "You are not a burden, Mrs. Morgan. You are a person in need of help, and I have the means to help, that is all." He stood and offered her his hand. "Now come on, Madisonville is waiting." She took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet with easy strength. Then he mounted the horse and reached down for her. She had never ridden like this before, sitting sideways in front of a man, held in place by his arms as he controlled the reins, but there was no other choice. She let him pull her up. And then they were moving, the horse settling into an easy walk. It was strange to be this close to a man who was not her husband, strange to feel his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her. But Hayes Jackson kept himself as distant as possible, given the circumstances, his body angled away from hers, his touch never lingering. She found herself relaxing despite herself, lulled by the rocking motion of the horse and the warmth of the morning sun. "Tell me about Madisonville," she said after a while, needing to fill the silence. "I was only there for 2 days before my husband decided we should leave." "It is a small town, maybe 300 people on a good day," Hayes said. His voice rumbled through his chest, and she could feel the vibration of it. "We have got a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and a school. Not much, but it is growing. The railroad is coming through in the next year or so, and that will change things. Do you live in town?" "No, madam. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. It is not much, just me and about 200 head of cattle, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice, and she understood it. Out here, owning land meant everything. It meant survival. It meant a future. "How long have you had it?" 3 years. I worked as a hired hand for almost 10 years before that, saving every penny, bought the land from a widow who was moving back east to live with her daughter." He paused, then added, "It is not easy work running a ranch alone, but it is honest work, and I like the solitude." "You do not get lonely?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, but lonely is better than some alternatives." She wondered what he meant by that, but did not ask. They rode on through the morning, the sun climbing higher, the grassland rolling past them in gentle waves. Hayes pointed out landmarks as they went, teaching her to read the land, showing her which plants held water, which tracks belonged to which animals, how to tell direction by the sun and stars. He talked easily when the subject was the prairie, his voice relaxing, and she found herself hanging on his words, fascinated by this world she had known nothing about. By midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat more hardtack and dried beef from Hayes's supplies. Amelia's feet were feeling better thanks to the salve, but her whole body ached from the unfamiliar position of riding. She tried to stretch discreetly, not wanting to complain. "We will be in Madisonville by evening," Hayes said, watching the horizon. "I can take you to the hotel. Mrs. Fletcher, who runs it, is a decent woman. She will help you figure out what to do next." "I do not have money for a hotel," Amelia said quietly. "I do not have money for anything." Hayes looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his eyes. "Then you will stay at my ranch until we figure something out. I have a spare room. It is not fancy, but it is clean and safe." "I cannot ask that of you." "You're not asking. I am offering." His voice was firm. "Mrs. Morgan, you are a widow with no family nearby, no money, and no prospects. Where exactly do you think you are going to go?" The bluntness of it stung, but he was right. She had nowhere to go and no way to get there. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." "Because someone should," he said simply. "Because it is the right thing to do. And because I know what it is like to have nowhere to turn." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Amelia felt something pass between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Hayes Jackson was alone in the world too. Maybe not in the same way she was, but alone nonetheless. And that loneliness had taught him compassion. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded once, then turned back to his horse. "Come on, we should keep moving." They rode through the afternoon, the land gradually becoming more settled, with occasional homesteads visible in the distance. Hayes pointed out his neighbors, telling her who was trustworthy and who to avoid, giving her the kind of information she would need if she was going to stay in the area. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Amelia realized she had already decided to stay. There was nothing for her back in Madisonville proper, nothing for her anywhere else. But here, on this open prairie, with this quiet cowboy who had shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect, she felt the first stirrings of something that might eventually become hope. The sun was setting when they finally rode into Madisonville. It was exactly as Hayes had described, a small collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, with houses scattered beyond. People were out enjoying the cooler evening air, and more than a few heads turned to stare as Hayes rode through with a woman sitting in front of him. "They are going to talk," Hayes said quietly. "Small towns do that. Do not let it bother you." "I am past caring what people think," Amelia replied, and was surprised to find it was true. She had lost everything. Gossip seemed like the least of her worries. Hayes stopped in front of the general store, which was just closing for the day. A woman in her 50s stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with obvious interest. "Evening, Mrs. Patterson," Hayes said politely. "This is Mrs. Amelia Morgan. Her husband was killed by outlaws a few days back, and she has been stranded. I found her out by Willow Creek." The woman's expression immediately softened. "Oh, you poor dear. Come inside, both of you. You look half-starved." "Thank you, madam, but I need to get Mrs. Morgan settled at my ranch," Hayes said. "I was hoping to buy some supplies first. She lost everything when the outlaws took her wagon." Mrs. Patterson looked between them, her eyebrows raised slightly. "Your ranch? Hayes Jackson, you know what people will say about a young widow staying at a bachelor's ranch." "I know," Hayes said evenly, "and I do not much care. She needs a place to stay, and I have one. If people want to talk, let them." Something in his tone made it clear the subject was closed. Mrs. Patterson studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right then. Come in and let's see what we can do." They spent the next half hour gathering supplies. Mrs. Patterson, once she understood the situation, was generous almost to a fault. insisting Amelia take 2 dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, a pair of proper boots, and various other necessities. When Hayes tried to pay, the woman waved him off for half of it. "Consider it charity," she said firmly. "The church fund can cover it. Lord knows we have got money sitting around for exactly this kind of situation." By the time they left the store, loaded down with parcels, the sun had fully set and stars were beginning to appear overhead. Hayes helped Amelia back onto the horse, and they rode out of town toward his ranch. She could feel eyes on them as they left, could practically hear the whispers starting, but Hayes had been right. She did not care. Let them talk. She was alive, and that was more than she had expected 2 days ago. The ranch house appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream. It was small, just a simple structure with a covered porch, but it looked solid and well-maintained. Behind it, she could see the shadowy outline of a barn and a corral. Hayes dismounted and helped her down, then unlocked the front door and ushered her inside. He lit a lamp, and warm light filled the single main room. It was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace on one wall, a table and chairs, a small kitchen area, and a door leading to what she assumed were the bedrooms. The floor was wood, swept clean, and there was a bookshelf against one wall filled with books in various states of wear. "The spare room is through there," Hayes said, pointing to a door on the right. "It has got a bed and a dresser, not much else, but it is yours for as long as you need it. My room is on the left. The necessary is out back." Amelia walked to the door he had indicated and opened it. The room was small, with a single window that would let in morning light. The bed was neatly made, and everything smelled faintly of cedar. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It is perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson." "Hayes," he said, "if you're going to be staying here, we can drop the formalities, and you should call me by my given name anyway. Mr. Jackson was my father." "Then you should call me Amelia." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less weary. "All right, Amelia. Are you hungry? I can make us some supper." They ate together at his small table, a simple meal of beans and cornbread that Hayes cooked with the ease of long practice. Amelia found herself studying him as they ate, noticing small things. The way he moved around his own kitchen with comfortable familiarity. The way his hands, large and work-roughened, were nevertheless gentle when he handed her a plate. The way he kept his eyes down, as if afraid of making her uncomfortable. "How old are you?" she asked suddenly, then flushed. "I'm sorry, that was rude." 24, he said, not seeming offended. "And you?" 22. I will be 23 in October." She paused, then added, "Thomas was 41. It was an arranged marriage. My father owed him money." Hayes's jaw tightened, but he did not comment. "You do not have to explain anything to me, Amelia. Your past is your own business." "I know, but I want you to understand we were not. It was not a love match." She could feel her face burning. "He was kind enough, but we barely knew each other. We had only been married for 3 months." "You do not need to justify your grief or lack thereof to me," Hayes said gently. "Grief is complicated. There is no right way to feel." His understanding made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "How are you so kind? How are you so decent? I thought men like you only existed in storybooks." He looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I am just ordinary, Amelia. I have made my share of mistakes, but I had a mother who raised me right before she passed, and I try to honor her memory by treating people the way she would have wanted me to." "Tell me about her," Amelia said, wanting to know more about this man who had saved her life. So he did. He told her about his mother, a strong woman who had raised him alone after his father died in the war, how she had worked as a seamstress and taken in laundry to keep them fed. He told her about learning to ride from a neighbor, about his first job as a ranch hand at 14, about saving every penny for years to buy his own land. He talked until the lamp burned low, and Amelia listened, drawn in by the quiet passion in his voice when he spoke about his dreams for the ranch, about the life he was building. When she finally went to bed that night, in the small room that smelled of cedar, she felt something she had not felt in months. Safe. For the first time since her father had told her she was to marry Thomas Morgan to settle a debt, she felt safe. The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Amelia woke each morning to find Hayes already up and working, tending to his cattle and horses, mending fences, doing the endless work that came with running a ranch alone. She insisted on helping however she could, cooking meals, cleaning the house, mending his worn clothes. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose again. Hayes was gone most of each day, out on the range with his cattle, but he always came back for meals, washing up at the pump outside before coming in. They would eat together, talking about their days, sharing stories about their lives. Amelia found herself looking forward to these meals, to the sound of his voice, to the way he listened when she spoke as if her words actually mattered. She learned that he was a careful man, thoughtful and deliberate in everything he did. He did not waste words or gestures. When he promised something, he followed through. When he said he would be back by sunset, he was back by sunset. It was such a stark contrast to her father, who had promised everything and delivered nothing, and even to Thomas, who had been well-meaning but vague, always talking about things they would do someday without ever making concrete plans. 3 weeks after Hayes had found her by the creek, they were sitting on the porch after supper watching the sun set over the prairie. The evening was warm, and somewhere in the distance cattle were lowing softly. It was peaceful in a way that made Amelia's chest ache. "I need to start thinking about the future," she said quietly. "I cannot stay here forever living off your charity." Hayes was silent for a long moment. "You are not living off charity. You earn your keep with the work you do. This house has never been cleaner, and I have not eaten this well since my mother died." "That is kind of you to say, but we both know it is not the same as paying my way. I need to find work, real work, maybe in town. Mrs. Patterson mentioned the hotel sometimes needs help. Is that what you want? To work at the hotel?" She thought about it. "I do not know what I want. I spent my whole life being told what to do, where to go, who to marry. I have never had the chance to decide for myself." "Then take that chance now," Hayes said. "You do not have to rush into anything. Stay here, help with the ranch, and think about what you really want. When you figure it out, I will help you however I can." "Why are you so good to me?" she asked, not for the first time. He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were very dark. "Because I like having you here," he said simply. "Because this house has felt more like a home in the past 3 weeks than it has in the 3 years I have owned it. Because when I ride back here at the end of the day and see smoke coming from the chimney, I feel something I have not felt in a long time." "What is that?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hope," he said. "I feel hope." Something shifted between them in that moment, a current of feeling that made Amelia's breath catch. She realized with sudden clarity that she had been falling for Hayes Jackson since the moment he had turned his head away at the creek, since the first time he had shown her the kind of respect and decency she had never known she deserved. And from the way he was looking at her now, she thought maybe, possibly, he might feel the same way. But then he stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "I should check on the horses before it gets full dark," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I will see you in the morning, Amelia." He left her sitting on the porch, her heart pounding, wondering what had just happened and what it meant. The next few days were strange. Hayes seemed to be avoiding her, leaving earlier in the mornings and coming back later in the evenings. When they did eat together, he was polite but distant, none of the easy conversation they had developed. Amelia did not know what she had done wrong, but the change hurt more than she wanted to admit. Finally, after nearly a week of this, she decided she could not take it anymore. She waited until he came in for supper, then confronted him before he could escape again. "Have I done something to offend you?" she asked, standing between him and the door to his room. "Because if I have, I wish you would tell me so I can apologize." Hayes stopped, his hand on the door frame, his shoulders tense. You have not done anything wrong, Amelia. Then why are you avoiding me? Why have you barely spoken to me in days? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Because I am trying to be honorable, he said, his voice low and strained, because you are a widow, barely a month past losing your husband, and you are living in my house under my protection, because anything I feel, anything I want, would be completely inappropriate given the circumstances. Her heart was racing. And what is it that you feel? What is it that you want? Amelia, do not ask me that. I am asking. She took a step toward him, brave in a way she had never been before. I am asking, Hayes, because I need to know if I am alone in this or if you feel it too. Feel what? But his voice was hoarse, and she knew he understood exactly what she meant. This, she said, gesturing between them, this thing that has been growing between us since the first day, this feeling I get when you walk into a room like the sun just came out, this ache in my chest when you smile at me. Tell me I am not imagining it. Tell me you feel it too. Hayes closed his eyes, his jaw working. You are not imagining it, he said finally. God help me, you are not imagining it. But Amelia, you have been through so much. You have lost everything. How can you know what you really feel? How can you know this is not just gratitude or loneliness or trauma making you think you want something you do not? Because I know my own heart, she said firmly. For the first time in my life, I know what I want, and I want you. He opened his eyes then, and the naked longing in them made her knees weak. I found you by that creek, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, wringing water from your only dress, looking like the saddest, bravest thing I had ever seen. And I thought to myself, this woman has been through hell, and she is still standing. I looked away and built that fire because I wanted to give you dignity, wanted to give you choice. But every day since then, it has gotten harder to look away. Every day since then, I have wanted to tell you that you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met, that your strength humbles me, that the way you laugh at my terrible jokes makes me feel like I could move mountains, that I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me because I have no right to ask for your heart when you have already lost so much. Tears were streaming down Amelia's face. You are not asking for my heart, Hayes. I am giving it to you freely. I am choosing you, not because you saved me, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because you are good and kind and you make me want to be brave. Because when I think about the future, the only future I can imagine is one with you in it. For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other across the small space of his house. Then Hayes moved, closing the distance between them in 2 strides, and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. It was not like kissing Thomas had been, perfunctory and obligatory. This was fire and sweetness, longing and promise. Hayes kissed her like she was precious, like she was something he had been waiting his whole life to find, and she kissed him back with all the feeling she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. We should probably talk about this, he said, sounding dazed. Figure out what we are doing. I know what I'm doing, Amelia said, smiling through her tears. I am falling in love with a cowboy who was decent enough to look away and build me a fire when I needed it most. Hayes laughed, the sound warm and full of joy. When you put it like that, how can I argue? He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. I love you, Amelia Morgan. I know it is fast. I know people will talk, but I do not care. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I love you too, she said, the words feeling right and true. And yes, Hayes Jackson, yes to all of it. They stood there holding each other as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Amelia thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the grief and loss and terror. And she thought about how sometimes, in the darkest moments, grace appeared in the most unexpected forms. Her grace had come in the shape of a cowboy who had looked away when he could have looked, who had offered help when he could have ridden past, who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen and valued. The next morning, Hayes rode into town and came back with Reverend Miller, the circuit preacher who served Madisonville and the surrounding ranches. Amelia wore one of the dresses Mrs. Patterson had given her, a simple cotton thing in pale yellow, and Hayes wore his cleanest shirt. They stood on the porch of the ranch house with the prairie stretching out endlessly behind them and spoke their vows. "I promise to honor you," Hayes said, his voice steady and sure, "to protect you, to work beside you to build the life we both want. I promise to listen when you speak, to value your thoughts and feelings, to never take your presence for granted. I promise to love you all the days of my life." Amelia's voice was thick with emotion as she replied, "I promise to stand beside you in all things, to build a home with you, to face whatever comes with courage and grace. I promise to trust you, to believe in you, to see you for who you are, and love you all the more for it. I promise to love you all the days of my life." Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, and Hayes kissed her softly, sweetly, a promise of all the kisses to come. Mrs. Patterson, who had insisted on coming along as a witness and had brought half the general store's inventory as a wedding present, was crying openly. "I knew it," she said, dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. "From the moment I saw you two ride into town together, I knew. You have got that look about you, like you were meant to find each other." Maybe they were, Amelia thought. Maybe everything that had happened, all the pain and loss, had been leading her here, to this man, to this life. She did not know if she believed in fate, but she believed in Hayes, in the life they would build together, in the love she felt growing stronger with each passing moment. The first months of their marriage were harder than Amelia had expected, but good in a way that made the hardship worthwhile. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of work that came with raising cattle. She learned to ride properly, learned to rope and brand, learned which cows were likely to charge and which were gentle. Hayes taught her with patience and humor, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things, always praising her when she got something right. She also learned him, this man she had married. She learned that he was quiet in the mornings until he had his first cup of coffee, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a bull that had gored him when he was 19, that he read voraciously everything from dime novels to Shakespeare and would read aloud to her in the evenings, his voice bringing the words to life, that he had nightmares sometimes, waking, gasping, and disoriented, though he would never tell her what they were about, that he loved with his whole heart, fiercely and completely, but struggled to accept love in return, as if he did not quite believe he deserved it. Amelia made it her mission to show him he did. She learned to cook the things he loved, learned to mend his clothes exactly the way he liked, learned to leave him alone when he needed solitude, and to reach for him when he needed connection. She told him every day that she loved him, that she was grateful for him, that he had given her a life she had never dreamed possible. The town gossip, which had been vicious at first, gradually died down as people saw that Hayes and Amelia were genuinely in love, genuinely building a life together. Mrs. Patterson became a fierce defender, shutting down rumors with a sharp word and a sharper look. Other neighbors began to warm to them as well, inviting them to socials and barn dances, treating Amelia as one of their own. 6 months after their wedding, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Hayes one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, and the look on his face was worth every hardship she had ever endured. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "As sure as I can be without a doctor. I've missed my courses, and I have been sick every morning for 2 weeks. Hayes pulled her into his lap, holding her close, his hands playing protectively over her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said softly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, kissing her temple. Terrified, yes, but so happy, Amelia. You have given me everything. A home, a family, a reason to believe in good things. How could I be anything but happy? The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, and the summer heat made everything worse. But Hayes was there for every moment, holding her hair back when she was ill, bringing her cool water and damp cloths, doing extra chores so she could rest. He hired a neighbor boy to help with the ranch work so he could spend more time with her, refusing to leave her side for longer than necessary. By the time winter came and her sickness eased, Amelia was large and ungainly, her belly swollen with their child. She felt like a cow, she told Hayes one night, and he had laughed and kissed her and told her she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And the way he looked at her with such open adoration made her believe him. Their son was born on a freezing night in February 1877 during a blizzard that kept the doctor from coming. Hayes delivered the baby himself, his hand shaking but steady, talking Amelia through each contraction with a calmness he did not feel. When the baby finally came, wailing and red-faced and perfect, Hayes cut the cord with tears streaming down his face. "It is a boy," he said, his voice breaking. "Amelia, we have a son." She held out her arms, and he placed the baby in them, this tiny, perfect creature they had made together. The baby had Hayes's dark hair and her nose, and his eyes, when he opened them, were dark and solemn. "What should we name him?" Hayes asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand on Amelia's shoulder and one finger clutched in their son's tiny fist. "Henry," Amelia said without hesitation, "Henry Thomas Jackson. Henry for his grandfather on your side, and Thomas, so my first husband is not forgotten, even if I did not love him the way I love you." Hayes looked at her with such love it took her breath away. "Henry Thomas Jackson," he repeated. "It is perfect. You are perfect." Being a mother was harder than Amelia had anticipated, but also more rewarding. Henry was a fussy baby, colicky and prone to crying, and the first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and exhaustion. But Hayes was there for all of it, walking the floor with Henry when Amelia was too tired, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always worked. They learned together, figuring out what soothed their son, what made him laugh, what he needed. And slowly, as Henry grew, the fog of exhaustion lifted and was replaced with joy. Henry's first smile directed at Hayes as he made funny faces made them both cry. His first laugh, a belly-deep chortle at the antics of the ranch dog, filled the house with happiness. His first steps, taken from Hayes to Amelia across the kitchen floor, were celebrated like a national holiday. The ranch prospered as well. With the money from selling cattle and careful management, Hayes was able to expand, buying more land and more cattle. He hired 2 permanent ranch hands, men he trusted to help with the work, which meant he could spend more time with Amelia and Henry. They built an addition onto the house, adding a proper bedroom for Henry and a larger kitchen for Amelia. Life was good, better than good. It was everything Amelia had never known to want. When Henry was 2, Amelia found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born on a warm spring day in 1879, coming into the world with minimal fuss and maximum attitude. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and from the first moment she had Hayes wrapped around her tiny finger. They named her Hope, because that was what Hayes had told Amelia he felt the first time he realized he was falling in love with her. Hope Jackson grew like a weed, keeping up with her older brother, refusing to be left behind or treated differently because she was a girl. By the time she was 3 and Henry was 5, they were inseparable. Racing across the prairie on ponies Hayes had gentled specifically for them, playing elaborate games that only they understood. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Hayes's ranch became one of the most successful in the county, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Amelia became involved in the community, helping to establish a school in Madisonville, Working with other women to build a church, organizing socials and fundraisers, she made friends, real friends, women who valued her opinion and sought her advice. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes surprised her with a picnic by Willow Creek, the place where he had first found her. They rode out together in the wagon, leaving Henry and Hope with Mrs. Patterson for the afternoon, and spread a blanket near the water. "Do you ever think about that day?" Hayes asked, lying beside her, his hand in hers. "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" Amelia turned to look at him. This man she had spent a decade loving, this man who had given her everything. His hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "The only thing I regret," she said slowly, "is that I had to go through so much pain to find you. But I do not regret a single moment since. How could I? When those moments gave me you, gave me our children, gave me this life." "I think about it sometimes," Hayes admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I had ridden a different way that day, if I had been an hour earlier or later. I think about all the ways I might have missed you, and it terrifies me." "But you did not miss me," Amelia said, squeezing his hand. "You found me when I needed you most. You looked away and built me a fire and gave me dignity when I had nothing. And every day since, you have shown me what it means to be truly loved." Hayes turned onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "I am the lucky one, Amelia. You took a broken-down cowboy with a struggling ranch and a lonely house and turned it all into a home. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be better than I was. Everything good in my life comes from you. Everything good in my life comes from you too," she said, pulling him down for a kiss. "We made each other better. We saved each other." They lay there by the creek for hours, talking and laughing and watching the clouds drift by. It was peaceful in a way that made Amelia's heart full to bursting. She thought about the girl she had been, terrified and alone, wringing water from her only dress. She thought about how far she had come, how much she had changed. And she thought about the man beside her, the man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and crimson it had been on their wedding day, Hayes helped her pack up the picnic. Before they left, though, he pulled her close one more time. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For choosing me. For loving me. For building this life with me. For being exactly who you are." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "For everything, Amelia. Thank you for everything." They rode home together through the gathering darkness, and when they arrived, Henry and Hope came running out to greet them, full of stories about their day with Mrs. Patterson. Hayes swept Hope up into his arms while Henry grabbed Amelia's hand, and together the four of them went inside the house that had become a home. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. When Henry was 15 and Hope was 13, they added another child to their family, not through birth, but through circumstance. A young boy named Samuel, son of one of their ranch hands who had died in an accident, needed a home. Hayes and Amelia took him in without hesitation, giving him their last name and all the love they had given their own children. Samuel, quiet and grieving at first, slowly blossomed under their care, becoming as much a part of the Jackson family as if he had been born to them. By the time the 1890s arrived, Hayes and Amelia were in their 40s, and the ranch had grown into a substantial operation. Henry was preparing to take over day-to-day operations, showing the same steady determination his father had always exhibited. Hope was teaching at the school in Madisonville, fierce and passionate about education. Samuel was learning to be a blacksmith, having discovered a talent for working with metal. Hayes and Amelia, their children grown or nearly so, found themselves with time they had not had in years. They used it well, traveling to San Antonio and Austin, seeing parts of Texas they had never visited. They took long rides across the prairie, just the two of them, talking about everything and nothing. They sat on their porch in the evenings watching the sunset, counting their blessings. Do you know what the best part of my life has been? Hayes asked one evening as they rocked in chairs on that same porch where they had first admitted their feelings for each other. Tell me, Amelia said, though she thought she knew. Every day with you, he said simply. Every single day from that first one by the creek to this one right here, people talk about great adventures, about wealth and fame and glory, but this, what we have built together, this is the real adventure. This is what matters. I feel the same way, Amelia said, reaching for his hand. You know, sometimes I try to imagine what my life would have been like if Thomas had not been killed, if the outlaws had never come, and I cannot do it. I cannot imagine any life but this one, any love but yours. Do you think that makes us terrible people? Hayes asked. That we are grateful for something that came from such tragedy? Amelia thought about it. No, she said finally. I think it makes us human. We did not cause the tragedy and we did not celebrate it. But we took the pieces of our broken lives and built something beautiful. There is no shame in that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were settling for the night, and from inside the house came the sound of Samuel practicing his guitar, the notes sweet and slightly off-key. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life well lived. As they grew older, Hayes and Amelia made sure to pass on their values to their children and grandchildren. They taught them about hard work and compassion, about treating all people with dignity and respect regardless of their station in life. They told them the story of how they had met, of how Hayes had found Amelia by Willow Creek and looked away and built a fire, giving her the choice of whether to trust him or not. That is what love is, Hayes would tell his grandchildren, bouncing them on his knee. It is not about grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It is about the small choices you make every day, the choice to be kind when you could be cruel, the choice to help when you could walk away, the choice to see someone at their most vulnerable and offer them dignity instead of taking advantage. And Amelia would add, it is also about being brave enough to accept help when you need it, to trust when you have been hurt, to open your heart even when you are afraid. Love requires courage from both people. The children would listen wide-eyed, and Amelia would catch Hayes's eye across the room and smile. They had built something that would last beyond them, a legacy of love and decency that would ripple out through generations. In 1903, on a warm summer evening, Hayes and Amelia celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. All their children were there, along with their spouses and children. Henry, now 30, and the picture of his father stood with his wife and 3 children. Hope, 28, and still teaching, had recently married a banker from Austin, and they were expecting their first child. Samuel, 24, stood with his new bride, a sweet girl from town. The yard was filled with friends and neighbors, people whose lives Hayes and Amelia had touched over the years. Mrs. Patterson was there, now in her 80s, but still sharp as a tack, holding court and telling stories about the early days. The ranch hands, past and present, had come to pay their respects to the boss and his wife who had always treated them fairly. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Hayes pulled Amelia onto the makeshift dance floor. A fiddle player struck up a waltz, and they moved together with the ease of long practice, their steps perfectly matched after so many years. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Jackson," Hayes murmured, pulling her close. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Jackson," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. 25 years, can you believe it? "Best 25 years of my life," he said, "and I'm looking forward to the next 25. Amelia laughed. "We will be in our 70s by then. I do not care. As long as I have you, I have everything I need." They danced until the music stopped, and then they stood together at the edge of the crowd, watching their family and friends celebrate. Their children were laughing. Their grandchildren were running wild through the yard, and everywhere Amelia looked, she saw evidence of the life they had built together, not just in the ranch buildings and the thriving cattle business, but in the people, in the lives they had touched, the love they had shared, the values they had instilled. We did good, did we not? Hayes asked softly. We did very good, Amelia agreed, squeezing his hand. They stood there, as the night deepened, neither of them in any hurry to move. This was their life, their love, their legacy. And it had all started with a cowboy who had been decent enough to look away and build a fire for a woman in need. The years continued, as years do, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost Mrs. Patterson in 1905, and Hayes wept at her funeral, remembering the woman who had been kind to them when others had gossiped. They celebrated the births of more grandchildren, each one a blessing. They weathered droughts and good years, economic panics and recoveries, always together, always steady. In 1910, Hayes began to slow down. He was 58, and the years of hard physical labor were catching up with him. His joints ached in the morning, and he tired more easily than he once had. But he never complained, and he never stopped working, refusing to be sidelined even when Henry tried to take over more of the ranch duties. I am not dead yet, he would grumble when anyone suggested he should rest more. I have got years left in me. But Amelia saw the way he moved more carefully, the way he needed help mounting his horse some mornings. It scared her, the thought of losing him, but she kept her fears to herself. Instead, she made sure he ate well, that he took time to rest, that he saw the doctor regularly. She was not ready to let him go, and she would fight for every day they had left together. One evening in early spring of 1911, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before, Hayes turned to Amelia with a serious expression. I need to tell you something, he said. Her heart stuttered with fear. What is it? Are you ill? No, nothing like that, he assured her quickly. I just need you to know something in case anything ever happens to me. I need you to know that you have been the greatest blessing of my life, that every single day with you has been a gift, that if I died tomorrow, I would die happy because I got to love you. Hayes Jackson, do not talk like that, Amelia said, her voice shaking. You are not going anywhere. We are all going somewhere eventually, darling, he said gently, and I am not saying it will be tomorrow or next year or even 10 years from now. I am just saying that I want you to know how I feel. I want you to know that you made my life worth living. Amelia moved from her chair to his lap, something she had not done in years, and wrapped her arms around his neck. You made my life worth living too, she said fiercely. You saved me, Hayes, not just that day by the creek, but every day since. You showed me what love should be, what partnership should look like. You gave me a family and a home and a life I never dreamed possible. So do not you dare talk about leaving me. We have got years left, do you hear me? Years and years. Hayes held her close, his face buried in her hair. Years and years, he agreed. I promise to stick around as long as I can. And he did. Years and years more, in fact. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, their 35th, their 40th. Hayes moved slower as he aged, needed a cane eventually, could not ride as far or as long as he once had, but his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Amelia never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, more precious with each passing year. Amelia aged too, her hair going white, her hands becoming gnarled with arthritis. But she remained fiercely independent, still cooking for her family, still tending her garden, still organizing the church socials and school events. She and Hayes became institutions in Madisonville, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of what a good marriage should look like. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1927, the town threw them a celebration in the church. The building was packed with people. 3 generations of Jacksons, along with friends and neighbors and even strangers who had heard about the remarkable love story of Hayes and Amelia. The pastor asked them to come forward and share their secret. What had made their marriage last so long when so many others failed? Hayes and Amelia stood together at the front of the church, Hayes leaning heavily on his cane, Amelia holding his free arm. The secret, Hayes said, his voice still strong despite his age, is that we chose each other every day, not just on our wedding day, but every morning when we woke up, We chose to love each other. Through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, we made the choice to stay, to work through problems instead of running from them, to see the best in each other instead of focusing on flaws. And we respected each other, Amelia added. From the very first day, Hayes treated me with dignity and respect. He gave me choices instead of making demands. He listened to my opinions and valued my thoughts, and I tried to do the same for him. We were partners, not just husband and wife. We built this life together as equals. Most importantly, Hayes said, pulling Amelia closer, we never forgot why we fell in love in the first place. It is easy after 50 years to take each other for granted, but I made a point to remember every single day how blessed I was to have this remarkable woman by my side, and I made sure she knew it too. There was not a dry eye in the church. Even the toughest ranchers were discreetly wiping at their faces. The pastor led them all in a prayer of thanksgiving, and then the celebration moved to the churchyard where tables had been set up with food and drink. As evening fell and the party continued around them, Hayes and Amelia found themselves alone for a moment, sitting on a bench under a tree. They watched their family, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren playing together, and felt the weight of all those years, all that love, all that life they had lived together. Do you remember, Amelia said softly, that first night by the fire, when you looked away and gave me privacy and dignity when you could have done otherwise? I remember every moment of that night, Hayes replied. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen. I remember wanting to protect you, to help you, not because you were weak, but because you deserved help. That was when I started to fall in love with you, Amelia said. Not right then, maybe, but the seeds were planted that night, in the way you treated me like I mattered, like I was worth respecting. No one had ever done that before. You did matter, Hayes said. You still do. You are the most important person in my world, Amelia. You always have been. They sat there in the gathering darkness, holding hands like young lovers, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. And as the stars came out one by one above them, the same stars that had shone on them that first night by Willow Creek, Amelia thought about how strange and wonderful life was, how tragedy had led to blessing, how loss had led to love, how one cowboy's simple act of decency had changed the course of two lives forever. Hayes Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold November night in 1929, at the age of 77. He had been working in the barn that afternoon despite Amelia's protests that it was too cold, checking on a mare that was due to foal. He came in for supper, ate heartily, laughed at something their great-grandson had said, and then sat in his favorite chair by the fire to read. Amelia found him there an hour later, the book open on his lap, his eyes closed, a peaceful expression on his face. She knew immediately that he was gone, and the sound that came from her throat was the same sound she had made 53 years earlier when she had found Thomas dead beside their wagon. But this grief was different, deeper, because this was not the loss of an obligation or an arrangement. This was the loss of her heart, her soul, her partner in all things. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Texas to pay their respects. Henry and Hope and Samuel stood by their mother's side, supporting her when her legs threatened to give out, holding her when the tears came. The pastor spoke about Hayes's life, about his integrity and kindness, about the legacy he left behind. But the most powerful moment came when Amelia stood up to speak. Hayes Jackson was the best man I ever knew, she said, her voice steady despite her grief. He was good and kind and decent in a way that seems rare in this world. He treated everyone with respect, from the richest rancher to the poorest drifter. He worked hard, he loved deeply, and he never once made me regret trusting him with my heart. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. He found me at my lowest point when I had lost everything and saw no path forward. He could have ridden past, could have ignored me, could have taken advantage. Instead, he gave me dignity and help and eventually love. He showed me what it meant to be cherished, to be valued, to be loved the way every person deserves to be loved. And I will be grateful for that, for him, for every day we had together until the day I die and join him again. She lived another 8 years, staying in the ranch house they had shared, refusing to move in with any of her children even though they all offered. She tended her garden, visited with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and every evening at sunset she sat on the porch in Hayes's chair and talked to him as if he were still there. "I miss you," she would say into the gathering darkness. "I miss you so much. It feels like I cannot breathe sometimes, but I am still here, still living the life we built together, still honoring what we created. And when my time comes, I know you will be waiting for me." Amelia Jackson died in her sleep on a warm May morning in 1937 at the age of 85. Henry found her in her bed looking peaceful and content, a smile on her face. On the nightstand beside her was a photograph from their 50th wedding anniversary, Hayes and Amelia standing together, her hand in his, both of them looking at each other with such obvious love that it made the heart ache to see it. They buried her next to Hayes in the Madisonville Cemetery under a large oak tree with a view of the prairie. The headstone was simple but eloquent. Hayes Jackson, 1852-1929, and Amelia Jackson, 1854-1937, partners, lovers, friends, together forever. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new generation of Jacksons learning the story of how it all began. How a cowboy riding home found a woman wringing water from her only dress by a creek. How he looked away and built a fire, giving her dignity when she had nothing else. How that simple act of decency grew into a love story that lasted 53 years and created a legacy that would endure for a century and beyond. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch where Hayes and Amelia had spent so many evenings, and they would hear the story repeated, and they would understand that love was not just about passion or romance, though there was plenty of that. It was about respect and kindness and choosing each other every single day. It was about seeing someone at their most vulnerable and offering help instead of harm. It was about building something together, brick by brick, day by day, year by year, until you had created something that would outlast you both. The ranch is still there today, still owned by Jacksons, still running cattle on the same land Hayes bought with his savings all those years ago. The original house has been preserved, turned into something of a family museum, with photographs and artifacts from Hayes and Amelia's life. Visitors come from all over, drawn by the love story, wanting to see the place where it all happened. And if you go there at sunset on a spring evening, if you sit on that old porch and close your eyes, you can almost hear them. Hayes's voice, deep and steady, telling Amelia about his day. Amelia's laughter, bright and free at something he said. The comfortable silence that fell between them. The kind of silence that only came from decades of loving each other. Their story became legend in Madisonville, passed down through generations, told and retold until it took on a mythic quality. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been, a simple truth about two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose to build a life together despite the odds, who loved each other with everything they had until death parted them, and perhaps even beyond. Because love like that does not die when the lovers do. It lives on in the children they raised, in the values they instilled, in the community they built, in the story that continues to inspire everyone who hears it. Hayes and Amelia Jackson's love story became a testament to the power of human decency, the strength of commitment, and the enduring truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest acts of kindness. A cowboy looked away and built a fire for a woman in need. From that one choice, that one moment of grace, came a lifetime of love and a legacy that would never be forgotten. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that? To be loved, to be remembered, to have made a difference in the world through the simple act of treating another human being with dignity and respect. That was the gift Hayes gave Amelia that night by Willow Creek. And that was the gift they gave to everyone who came after them, showing by example what it meant to truly love and be loved in return.